Hello and welcome back. Do you know how sometimes the signals that reach us seem chaotic and nonsense, full of noise? How there seems to be no structure or valuable information in what we hear or see? Well, unveiling patterns of regularity is a task of great importance not just in telecommunications but in nature in general. Developing tools to extract signals of periodicity is paramount in science. In this video, I will briefly explain to you the content of my paper published in the journal Photonics in 2022 with Eastern Washington University undergraduate student Nat Yen and with Colton College professor Arjen Duparniak. The paper's title is TARDYS Quantifiers, Extracting Temporal and Reversible Dynamical Symmetries. Chaos is all around us, and it is frequently undistinguishable from noise. It's not noise, although most, if not all, the chaotic systems are in the presence of noise. From electronic circuits to population of animals in their environment, to circadian rhythms or laser dynamics, chaos in nature is the result of the complex interplay of nonlinear laws driving the system. You can obtain chaos from relatively simple equations like the logistic map that I will talk more later. When we know the equation or equations that rule the dynamical system, we can study it or the equations to understand the behavior of the output from the system. But in nature, we don't usually have the equations that describe the whole system. So we are limited to measure one or a few variables and need to get all the information from those measurements of that one or few variables that we have access to. It is convenient then to find techniques that allow us to unveil the dynamical symmetries from the time series recorded from the experiment. One technique introduced some years ago by Bant and Pomp studies the time series of data and transforms the time series into patterns, a sequence of patterns that we will also call as words. And with that technique, we can look at the temporal correlations between consecutive patterns or consecutive words. By comparing consecutive values, depending on the relative values, we transform the sequence of values into a sequence of words. We can then study the statistics of those words as if we were studying the language of the system. With this technique, all the words have the same length, the same dimension. So, for example, for words of dimension 3, we have 6 possible words. For words of dimension 4, we have 24 possible words. Here, the system that we want to study is the photonic neuron. This is a diode laser with an optical feedback from a mirror. This feedback destabilizes the laser, and the output intensity of the laser presents intensity dropouts, sudden dropout in intensity that resemble those spikes of the neurons. For this photonic neuron, we place the mirror at 70 centimeters and we applied a modulation in the amplitude so that the pump current has a set of constant voltage and a modulation of the voltage on top of that voltage. We study the temporal correlations of the inter-dropout intervals because the words capture the structure of the correlations between correlative intervals. We apply this technique and calculate the probabilities of the words. What is the population of words in a time series of the laser, and how do the populations change as we change the modulation amplitude? Well, this figure represents the probabilities of the 6 words of dimension 3 versus the modulation amplitude. If the dynamics were completely random, we would expect all the words to be equally probable and would be set at 1/6. While if the words populations are far from that 1/6 value, then it would be implying that there are signatures of determinism. In this figure, we can observe two clear transitions in the dynamics as we increase the modulation amplitude. For low amplitudes, the behavior seems to be compatible with the stochastic process, but as we increase, the dynamics become more and more deterministic-like. If we look at the hierarchies of the words, we observe some clusters and correlations among the probabilities. For example, the pink and cyan words seem to behave in the same way. Also, the black and green words seem to be clustered. Furthermore, the amount that the blue word moves away from randomness is the same as the green-black cluster, thus in the opposite direction. And the same happens for the red word and the pink-cyan cluster. This indicates that the dynamics has some constraints that limit the possible values of the word's populations. These are clear approximate symmetries, and I say approximate because the words are built based on comparing which inter-dropout interval is the larger or smaller, without really caring about the actual value of the intervals. Based on these observations, we define new quantifiers to capture these dynamical symmetries. We introduce the TARDYS as the Temporal and Reversible Dynamical Symmetries quantifiers. T-alpha captures the correlations in the trio blue-green-black, while T-beta captures the correlations in the trio red-pink-cyan. T-delta quantifies the presence of the two clusters, and T-rho measures the reversibility of the dynamics. We define these quantifiers so that a value of 1 means that the symmetry is fully satisfied, while lower values mean that the symmetry is not perfect. If we plot these quantifiers for the photonic neuron with external modulation, we find that T-alpha, T-beta, and T-delta are almost 1. We expected this as we built these quantifiers based precisely in the dynamical symmetries of the photonic neuron with modulation. Interestingly, reversibility is high for very low and very high modulation amplitude, but in the middle, where we found a transition in the dynamics, reversibility is reduced. This can be a good measure to identify dynamical transitions. Let's apply now these measures to other physical systems. For example, we choose a high-power fiber laser with feedback at almost 1 kilometer. It is also a photonic system, but it is very different from the photonic neuron we studied before. Here we increase the pump current from 0.8 to 1.4 watts of power. The dynamics do not show dropouts, and it is very chaotic as well. In previous studies, it was found that there is a transition from a laminar regime to a turbulent regime at around 0.9 watts. If we plot the words populations versus the pump current, we get that the dynamics present a very high deterministic-like behavior. If we plot the TARDYS quantifiers, we also find that T alpha, beta, and delta are almost 1, presenting the same dynamical symmetries as the photonic neuron, although the hierarchies of the words were different. We also see how reversibility decreases at the transitions from laminar to turbulent regimes. We can thus infer that these TARDYS quantifiers, derived from approximate dynamical symmetries of a photonic neuron, are not only good quantifiers to characterize the dynamical symmetries of other physical systems, but they are also useful in detecting dynamical transitions. In order to see the extent of these new quantifiers, we explored the logistic map, a well-studied mathematical model that, as we change the control parameter r, presents chaos with windows of periodicity. For this system, we track the value of x, which is limited to be between 0 and 1. This bifurcation diagram shows the limit of the value x for each r. There are clear regions that are chaotic, and the limit of x is not defined, so it's all over the place. While for other values of r, the limit of x is very well defined, even though it can oscillate between a few values. These are the so-called windows of periodicity. It can be period 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. The figure on top shows the world's populations as we change r. The hierarchies of the populations show clearly some constraints among them. The figure below shows the TARDYS as a function of r. Interestingly, all the TARDYS are 1 before 3.6. Although the system is chaotic there, then reversibility and T delta stop being 1, while T alpha and T beta remain maximum. TARDYS is capturing the temporal correlations and dynamical symmetries in the systems as we change the control parameter. Remember that we are showing a chaotic system. The windows of periodicity show a sharp change in these symmetries also. Let's have a closer look at T alpha and T beta. They happen to be equal except for a small window at around 3.8. If we zoom in, we can see that these two TARDYSes split right before entering into a window of periodicity, and right after exiting the window of periodicity they merge again. This is a great indicator for near change in dynamics to forecast the transition in behavior. When we are at the edge of chaos and the system is about to transition from or to periodicity, T alpha minus T beta will be non-zero. Let me walk you through this multiple figure. For each of the 4 cases, the top figure shows T alpha and T beta, while the bottom figure indicates the Lyapunov exponent. This exponent indicates if the dynamics is chaotic or not. For the exponent to be positive, the dynamics is chaotic. If the exponent is negative, then the dynamics is not chaotic. Let me finish this brief explanation by recalling one of our previous papers where we showed that combining 2 different quantifiers was more informative than the 2 quantifiers on their own. Here we also combined the TARDYS quantifiers with permutation entropy for the logistic map and find this 2D fingerprint where we can track the control parameter in color code. We can visualize the dynamical constraints and how reversibility or T beta evolve as entropy evolves. To wrap up, we have explored the approximate dynamical symmetries of a photonic neuron to characterize its dynamics. Based on those symmetries, we have introduced the TARDYS quantifiers as a set of measures of global temporal symmetries. The TARDYS, although based on the dynamics of a photonic neuron, can be extrapolated to other physical complex systems. They are informative in other photonic systems as well as in theoretical iterative maps such as the logistic map and others that we studied but I have not shown in this video. They are able to provide signals of transitions from chaos to periodicity, and those quantifiers can be a good tool to forecast those precise transitions. When combined with permutation entropy, TARDYS quantifiers serve as a good way to visually classify different families of complex dynamics in a 2D landscape. Also, being able to anticipate transitions of dynamics of extreme events is a critical challenge for earthquakes or heat waves or epilepsy or extinction events. Nature presents many systems that display sudden extreme events or transitions of dynamical regimes. One approach to anticipate transitions used is the Lyapunov exponent as an early warning signal. Regrettably, in addition to this not always being conclusive, it requires a hard computational problem in propagating differential equations, and on the other hand, an enormous challenge for experimental data, which is most of the time inaccessible. TARDYS are simple to compute, well adapted to experimental data, including being robust to noise, and have been proved to provide information about approximate dynamical symmetries that precede certain dynamical transitions. We note that this work has focused on dynamical symmetries of dimension 3. Higher dimensions could target other, more detailed symmetries. Well, thanks for watching. So long, and may science be with you.